She said, I'm not going to carry a pass.
So how did they manage to mobilize more than 20,000 women?
Lillian and Goy, myself, Helen Joseph, Rahima Musa walked to the offices.
How they managed to get 20,000 people to show up.
And they came from all over the country. They took days to come over to the march.
They were shocked and surprised and mystified. We've come to see Mr. Strider. Can you tell him we are here?
That 20,000 contingent of women stood silent for 30 minutes.
So Cape Town's quite far away from Pretoria. I see pictures, and 4 women are leading. Lillian Ngoyi, shop steward in the Garment Workers Union. Helen Joseph worked in the medical aid, the Garment Workers Union. Sophie Peters from the Textile Workers Union, and Rahima Musa from the Food and Canning Workers Union. I felt so proud. The dignity, the composure. And in a sense, they were way ahead of the Congress Alliance, these big structures representing different groups. Obviously chosen to not only represent different unions, but also to represent the diversity of South African society.
When we look at history in the way that is told through the lens of men and men who have been big figures in history, all these nuances are absent because we are obsessed with the big men of history. And to the extent that we look at women, we are obsessed with the big women of history. So we look at 1956, we look at the 4 women who led the march. But there's so much that is lost.
I always say there were 20,000 stories because each woman had a different story as to how they got there, why they got there, what they had to overcome. So, and many of the women told the stories to their children. So it had a profound impact upon families around the country. And I think the great pity is that there was not greater effort to record this history in a more systematic way. I think the stories of many, many women, which would have led to a real social history of this country in a way, because people came from everywhere. And so they had different stories to tell. The other thing which I think was a pity was what actually happened to those petitions. There were boxes and boxes of petitions, and they were handed over to Strydom or whoever took it on behalf of the Prime Minister Strydom at the time. And there's no record of where those petitions were put. Were they destroyed? Were they put in a vault somewhere? Are they in an archive somewhere? You know, I've asked, maybe the answer is out there, but I've never received an answer to the questions when I asked.
So many of the leaders in the 1950s, and these would also have included people like Albertina Sisulu, to a certain extent, although she was quite young then, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, would have continued trying to agitate. Helen Joseph was periodically under house arrest and then periodically not under house arrest. Lillian Ngoyi was under house arrest for large portions of the time thereafter. And all of these women tried to continue to participate in anti-apartheid politics, but it was increasingly difficult for them to do so.
Ke nna Memory Mphahlele. Ke tswalwa ke Esther. So mme wa ka a be a mpepa ka 1943. Ha a mpepa mme wa ka e be le gore wa kula mme. Ha mme a tlhokofala a be a mpha mme Lile ka be ke godiswa ke ena ke bile ngwana wa hae ka tsela e jwalo. Ngikhule kahle kakhulu because yena ebe nomntwana uyi-1 uIdis ka ba ngwana hae wa bobedi. Ke godile gantle e le mme o bogale a sa batle ntho tse ngata tse tswileng tseleng. Mme wa ka nna idlalla motšhaena mokgwagage ha tshwere ne re tlhaba mare ha ka jewa ne re kwata. Ha tshwere o tla reka nku. Ha rekile nku bomme ba neng ba bapalang le ena ba tlatla e tla tlhabiwa nku ele re ntshe mala beng ba batho ba strata ba tla fiwa mala a apilwe ka papa go jewa gore o na rata monate o na o rata monate gore ha re dutse go be monate. Ga ne a le under house arrest o ne a disguise ha tsamaya. Go na le ngwana wa brother wa ka ba re ke Namedi a tsamaya le ngwana o mare yena a apara se-India wa bona na disguise na rata go disguise a tsamaya le ngwana o wa le-India. Aya we kae le kae mare maponesana sa momone ha setse a disguisitse ka gore no go le thata gore a tsamaye fela.
After 1956 and after the treason trial, which is probably more significant in terms of what you're speaking about, and then subsequently the Rivonia trial, a lot of ANC operatives are either jailed. Some of the women that we spoke about are sent to the women's jail. So fast forward into the early 1960s, what you have is a series of events, probably beginning with the fact that South Africa leaves the Commonwealth in 1961 and becomes a republic. And this gives
Africa is multinational, and it will and must
the National Party what it feels is increased legitimacy to enact a whole new range of laws guaranteed to remove rights from Black South Africans. At the same time, you have the Suppression of Communism Act, which is always the oddly named act because it really locks down protestability in South Africa. It regulates carefully the conditions under which different organizations can protest, and it bans most of the active anti-apartheid organizations of the period.
In March 1960, the Pan-African Congress called a nationwide protest in which men and women would go without passes to the nearest police station and surrender themselves for arrest.
We just think we mustn't go to work. We must go to town to discuss about the past laws. They are going to ask our question about the past laws. Everybody in the location, everybody was powerful. No tiredness, no nothing. We was just singing. Africa.
So on this particular day, word went out that all passbooks must be burnt, to actually light up these passes and burn them. The slogan was "Away with the passes." The atmosphere was electric, to join in the bonfire, I remember that vividly. As a kid, you always loved to see fire. It was fun, But of course, later in the day, we heard news came over the radio.
Several hundred natives gathered peaceably to protest the past laws. Police, mounted on tanks, opened fire. 69 natives were killed, 176 wounded. Most of the victims were shot in the back. Some of the dead were children, women, and elderly men.
Internally in South Africa, most resistance has been crushed, and it's a relatively quiet decade. Even the women's organizations are effectively crushed, and there is not too much protest going on. By the early 1970s, it's clear, though, that an increasing, a larger black working class, which has to do with the growth of industry and formal employment for more black men and women, has meant that the Black South African population has more, and I use this phrase very loosely, bargaining power than was the case in the previous decade. The black universities are starting to produce black graduates, the Bush campuses, and there is a black middle class that is growing in science. So it's a very different context within the country.
Our medical school was titled Natal University Non-European Section. That act of discrimination by the apartheid system created an opportunity for us to meet and talk, get to know one another, and to finally ask the question, how do you explain that in a country less than 10% of the population can control and dominate more than 90% of the population? We had no answer. And after many weekends of meeting, because at medical school they work you like a dog every day. So Friday afternoon was the time when in the evening we'll sit and have chats, and Saturday we are relaxed, we also have chats until late. But Sunday you are now preparing for school. After those iterations of questions about how do you explain this math that doesn't add up, we sent a delegation of 2 people to the office of the principal, Mr. Hood, who was a National Party person, and said, we no longer want to be called this. He said, oh, okay, what do you want to be called? Black. We are black, proud Africans, and that's what we want to have on the label of our medical school. But we recognize that self-liberation of a small group is not going to do it. So Steve Biko gave up his studies from that time onwards and traveled across the country on every black campus, getting people to embrace this self-liberation. And of course, at the end of the year, we went back to the same principal to say, we need to have a conference because there are other black students who want to. And he said, what's your budget? What did we know about budgets? We were medical students. But we made a plan, and we had the conference, and we launched the South African Student Organization. And that was the beginning of the Black consciousness movement.
In our country, there shall be no minority, there shall be no majority, there shall just be people.
I get to Fort Hare, and the year is 1973. And by this time, there's this organization that is called SASO. And for my age, I'm already about 24. I'm old for the first year student. And there's a lot of activism. So no sooner had I gotten into Fort Hare, I got into SASO.
We ourselves as young people in the township in KwaMashu had formed ourselves into an organization, KwaMashu Youth Organization, which then affiliated to a Natal Youth Organization, which was an affiliate of the National Youth Organization, NAYO, which was part of the Black Consciousness broad umbrella organization of the time. It was what was available for Africans to be participants in, because the ANC and the PAC had already been banned as we were becoming teenagers and older. You know, something about our environment made us young activists go out of our way to do something, to intervene somehow. I have a photograph of us just going around the township and cleaning. You know, what I see sometimes just driving, like now, driving into the township, I find very sad and I find unacceptable.
That didn't just remain a movement of students, but we understood immediately that for this to add to the momentum for freedom, we have to mobilize every person that we encounter, our families, and as university students, we then started having weekend workshops for high school students.
One of the things that has been central to the mythology of the Soweto uprising has, of course, been the imposition of the language policy in Soweto and across the Transvaal, as it was at the time, that required half of all classes to be taught in Afrikaans. Black consciousness ideas, Black consciousness activists and Black consciousness organizations and high school students in Soweto interacted with each other and encountered each other in multiple different forms at different times. A whole year before the uprising, students, teachers, school principals, and the education boards within Soweto were all organizing and petitioning the Department of Education in opposition to this policy.
I still have very strong emotions about it. To a large extent, it was a defining moment for Black history, for African children, and for South Africa. It was a big moment. I've brought up my children remembering June 16 because I'm always awed by the life of Hector Peterson, and I just feel that it's a life taken. And it's hard for me to walk away from that life and walk away from that moment. But also, I think it's also a moment that I see as a moment that began South Africa talking, about young people, about the role of young people, and young people playing a meaningful role in South Africa and the development of South Africa.
The narratives that students who participated in the march on the morning of June the 16th give us provide a very wide sense of the expectations of participants in that march. But the key thing here is that no one involved in the march from the student side anticipated the violence that was going to come. And we need to understand that to understand how the students conducted themselves in these first hours. What we see is that from about 8 o'clock in the morning, the beginning of the official school day, students from most, not all schools, begin to walk out of their classes, gather in front of their school gates, and begin to march together along the main thoroughfares in Soweto. As they go, they communicate with students in other schools who are not necessarily part of the planning. Individuals go into the classrooms and tell them about the march, and students either join or sometimes do not join. They march carefully in rhythm, being very cautious about how they move, but they move straightforwardly together as a group. Other students describe a more chaotic experience in which they are pouring out of their classrooms, pouring out of their school gates, and joining in a march going in a direction that they're not entirely sure of. Tsitsi Mashinini is there, and multiple witnesses suggest him encouraging the students to remain calm, to remain steady, to sing, and try to avoid being threatening. Police testimony from that time while somewhat internally contradictory, suggests that the police were panicking.
As one of the people who were involved in the planning and the execution of 1976, June the 16th, I guess there are moments where you say, Lord, it costs lives, and that brings, there's a tear, there's a bitterness in that moment, but at the same time, one says, it wasn't planned that way. We couldn't have anticipated how desperate the system and the government of the time was at that time.
They were gathering together. They were afraid because of the size of the gathering of students. It was at least several hundred, probably not 1,000, but several hundred at least. The police were there with their canine units, with weapons, and with a small number of police vehicles. There was no question that there were more students than police officers. What happens next is impossible to describe with precision because it happens so quickly.
It was shocking. It was exciting. It was like a bad dream. Guns, bombs, people screaming, some laughing. It was just hysterical.
My son was born in 1974, and the first time I got arrested, he was 2 years old, and I left him in bed. I was staying in King Williamstown alone in some rural area. He was found by neighbors a day crying outside. So they found him because I was taken by the Boers. What could I do? When I was being tortured in Transkei, and I told him this story and I regretted. When I was being tortured, they showed me a red Volkswagen. I was driving a red Volkswagen at that time, working for the Daily Dispatch. They showed me this Volkswagen in a ravine, and they said that my son was inside that Volkswagen, and he had died there. And then they said that I must talk and tell them whatever they wanted. So I said, well, now that he has died, even if I told you anything, it's not going to bring him back. They said, at least you can go and bury him. I said, well, I don't think it's going to change anything. It's not going to bring him back. If at all is dead, he's dead. There's nothing I can do about it. And those who are there, they will bury him. The truth of the matter was that if he's dead, he's dead. But then, of course, the grief, once they are gone, I'm strong there in front of them. But once they are gone, the grief starts, and I cry and cry and cry and cry.
It's painful, but you don't allow it to break you. You cry in private, you work. So imagine losing the love of your life and you're expecting a baby, and I had to go through that. I break? No, no chance. This child has a right to a mother who can look after him and to then know who his father was and to walk in those footsteps. And so you model this self-liberation. No, show.
I have had the privilege of seeing women being detained with me. I have learnt of women being tortured in detention, just as men were. But what stands out is the way women resisted that torture, the way they came out of it resilient and unbending. I'm not aware, when you raise the question, I'm not aware of a single woman who broke down in detention and torture to the point where she deserted the liberation movement, became a state witness against her fellow comrades.
One of the things I had done, because I was a teacher, Esbonelo in KwaMashu, was to just, out of my own initiative, start having meetings with young, bright students that I could tell were ripe to have political discussions. And I was conscientizing them about some of the stuff that I was supposed to teach to them. And just playing a role, going out of my way to make sure that the black child was conscious of the environment in which they were growing up and the unacceptable position that they had been put in, and I myself had been put in as a black teacher, having to teach things that I didn't agree with. And so, in fact, very quickly, that became part of why I had to leave the country.
There were many other women, combatants in controversies were, members in Radio Freedom, members in the underground structures based in Botswana, in Lesotho, in Mozambique, later on after Zimbabwean independence in Zimbabwe, and in Tanzania and Zambia and Angola. There were women who came into the country as combatants.
The MK story is the story of my pain and tears in Maputo. When I'm sitting with the old man, Bob Mabida, Moses Mabida, who's asking me what would I like to do? Where would I like to go if I had a choice? And I told him I want to go to the camp. I want to go and train militarily. And the old man was not rough, not but he was firm, like a parent telling me that the leadership of the organization takes the responsibility to decide when it is necessary for it to decide which way people are going. So yes, we think it's very important to listen to what people want to do and to accommodate that as much as is possible, but there are times when the leadership has made up its mind that it is necessary to point you a different direction. And therefore, I'm sorry, that's not where you will go. And I immediately cried. But that was a firm decision, and I proceeded from Mozambique to Tanzania, and in Tanzania immediately joined Radio Freedom, which is what had been decided, because Radio Freedom was not very old as a structure of the ANC. And it was at different countries, and this was in Dar es Salaam. So we used to broadcast from Radio Tanzania. In other words, the Tanzanians gave us the facilities to use to work from that facility. And I did the scripts in Zulu and English. Yeah, in a nutshell, that's how it was, and it was enjoyable. I felt worthwhile. I felt that I was doing something I enjoyed.
After the October bannings, the consequences of those bannings needed to be mitigated. Bears suggested that I take advantage of my need to get out of the country for a short period of time. Firstly, because I had been, somebody that I had been hiding had been arrested, captured by the police, and there was some concern that there would then be, that person might give up my name, but also because there was a need to make contact with people outside the country on behalf of the organizations that had been banned in October. So I left the country. I was out of the country from 1978. It was supposed to be 10 weeks. It was 10 years.
When I come out of jail, the colleagues who are in the Eastern Cape, Malusi Mpumlwana and others, are of the view that I'm going to die in jail. Already Mapetla Mohapi has been killed, Steve Biko has been killed, and the way I'm a victim of this arrest, it is better for me to leave the country. I also realize that I'm endangering, by this time I have a son, I'm endangering my son and also my mother. So I leave the country, I agreed to leave the country through Lesotho. But the idea at that time is that Steve Biko died on a mission of trying to unite ANC and PAC so that there's only one organization. The idea is that those of us who leave the country, we must not join any of these organizations. We must work on unifying these organizations. Pani Pityana, who had left before me, is one of those who had been mandated to work on unity of the organizations in exile. So I'm supposed to be joining Pani Pityana and others, Tamizani and others, to really work on this unity. So I go to Lesotho and on this mission. But when I get to Lesotho, it becomes quite clear to me that unifying these organizations is not going to be done, is not going to work, especially done by me. Because by this time, I'm quite impatient. I just want to go back and liberate South Africa. I'm hot-headed. I must admit, I still am. I was quite hot-headed. I was not even recruited. I voluntarily went to Chris Ane's house and said, I want to join your organization. Well, Chris Ane was a very interesting character. He actually accepted that I accept that you want to join Umkhonto weSizwe. It was quite interesting because when you get to Umkhonto weSizwe, it is said, and you are integrated as a soldier. So that question of you're a woman is not so obvious because you do everything that has got to be done by men. But you begin to experience that, because I'm a woman, there's an expectation or Yeah, an expectation that I'm not going to do that well as a woman. You can see it's subtle, it's not open. As a woman, you are expected, or you see that you are given softer things to do, and you are being saved from, the harsher realities. So you've got to consciously make sure that you get onto the so-called men's kind of things that get done. So what we would do as this group of women in my group, we would make it a point that we train harder. Even when it was not time for training, we would go on the course and just run and make sure that we are the best, which is what happens generally with women wherever they are. You've got to be the best. If men do one, you've got to do 3 times than they do. And the second thing is that that's where you experience another form of patriarchy. In my group, we're less than 100 as women. Now, in the camps, it's one of those things, I'm going to belong here. You wake up at 4 o'clock, you stand in a queue, and you must stand on this line. You must know where your line is. And I'm standing behind you, and there's a man behind me. So every day, this man at 4 o'clock is going to say to me, I love you. And I'm going to say, I don't love you. And then this one from the back, so that's 4 o'clock. And you come back from the field. You were doing exercises, you were running. You come back and you line at about 6 o'clock. You are on the same line, the same man, and then right through the day, you will actually be standing in between these 2 men for 5 times or 6 times a day. And they'll be telling you every day, every moment that they love you. And you've got to say, "Andikthanda."
Firstly, let me say that it's obviously inaccurate if we're talking about protest politics outside South Africa to only speak about the ANC, because there were other organizations that were also active. The PAC is the one that comes obviously to mind. But we tend to know more about the ANC, and because we currently have an ANC government in power, it does affect how people tend to think about the history of the country, in the sense that we then focus more on the ANC than on other protest organizations. Someone like Thandi Modise was very important as a fighter in MK. There are another number of other women who were also involved in MK, but it was quite difficult for the women.
But one of the things that happened in the camps was that a weapon gave you power. There's nothing, for me, there was nothing as empowering as holding an AK in my hand, or even a pistol in my hand. So it happened that this one, we were on guard duty. So he comes and I don't see him. He comes from the back and he holds me, and I turn around, but then I move back. And then he really wants to hold me, and he says, "Namhlanje ngizokuphola, dala ngikutshela." And it's one of those men that I had been getting food from in the kitchen. So he thinks now he's got a right, because I've been making him believe that we can do something. Now, because I was senior in the camp, I was having both an AK and a pistol. Now that's seniority. So he was having only an AK. And he's coming. So I say to him, the thing that is going to happen is that I'm going to shoot it right where there's a problem. And I can't imagine, I don't think we will die. But I don't know how we are going to live after I've shot him there. And because now I'm a little bit of a distance, it means then that I'm holding the weapon, and I'm holding it right there where it matters. And at some point, it had been a problem that men were seen to be abusive to women, to a point where Chris Hani was called to the camp. And there was, I can't remember what rule it was called, but there was a rule that was called that if at all you dare touch or abuse a woman or harass a woman, you would be punished severely.
So if you were living in South Africa in the 1980s, it would have seen that the apartheid state was still very much in power, that it was in control, and that it was keeping a firm control over any dissident or anti-state forces. In retrospect, it's quite clear that, in fact, the political hold of the National Party on South Africa was already under threat by the late 1970s.
A lot is happening in the world, including in the Soviet Union, our comrades. There's perestroika, there's glasnost. We are being seriously persuaded to go home and talk. It's time for South Africans to sit and talk. And of course, Comrade Thabo quietly has been sent by our leader, O.R. Tambo, to start talking to the other side here. That was an interesting time. And it is the women who are the first to say, Tina, we're ready to go home, because we have met with women from inside the country.
By this time, I'd been working. First, I was working in the forward areas in Lesotho, commanding there. Then my cover was exposed, so I had to go to Botswana and command from Botswana. Then my cover was exposed again, so I had to leave from Botswana. And I opened camps in Uganda. And the year is 1989. I opened the first camps that were there. Soldiers were coming from Angola. Then I opened the camps in Uganda. And there's already, we hear amaheme ukuthi ingathi kuzawunegotiatwa, ingathi kuzawuthwane. And we as the MK, remember now we had been moved from Angola, so we were in it. We were clear that there's nothing that's going to happen. We are not negotiating. We are clear that we are winning this war.
My role in Operation Vula was as the person in charge of communications. So that was mainly what I focused my time on doing. One of the areas of work of Operation Vula was as part of the communication from the leadership inside the prisons, in particular from the communication from Madiba to OR Tambo in Lusaka. And so I had been part of that communication chain. And so to some extent, some of what was happening was less of a surprise.
The steps that have been decided are the following: the prohibition of the African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the South African Communist Party, and a number of subsidiary organizations is being rescinded. People serving prison sentences merely because they were members of one of these organizations, or because they committed another offense which was merely an offense because a prohibition of one of the organizations was in force, will be identified and released.